Awesome. So Chris, if you could just, for those who don't already know you, please obviously share a little bit about yourself and about what you do in the community, and then yeah, the show is all yours.
Great, thank you very much. So yes, my name is Chris Barber. I'm a Microsoft MVP, speaker before and speaker afterwards. Rishi is also a Microsoft MVP. I work a lot with the London Business Analytics Group, and I do a lot of talks in the community. I'm a chartered accountant by background, hence my interest in the financial statements, which is what this talk is all about. So I'm extremely interested in sort of how you can improve and use Power BI in the world of finance. So today what we're going to be covering through is kind of looking over the various advantages of building out the statements in Power BI. So, you get your statements, you can get them out of your ERP system like Dynamics or like SAP. Why would you need to go and build them in Power BI? What are the big advantages? I'm also going to take you through what I call the 3 Ls, which are the ledgers, the link, and the layout of your reports, which are the 3 things that you need to get from your business if you're going to try and build out your statements in Power BI. I'm going to talk through a few of the different methods that are out there. So I've got some methods and I've got some YouTube recordings on them. There's other methods out there as well. A very popular one is one by someone called Bob Duffy, who's another sort of key person in the area of business intelligence. He's definitely worth looking at. I'm then going to talk a little bit about Kimball in finance. So for those of you who don't know, when we looked at the previous session and we're talking about fact and dimension tables, that's all part of what's known as the Kimball methodology and the STAR schema. So we'll talk a little about Kimball and how that ties in with finance, and there's different types of fact tables in that, and there's sort of a relationship to the different accounts. So your balance sheet is linked to a certain type and your income statement to another. I'm then going to move over to looking at some of the recommended tools that you can use in conjunction with Power BI in order to implement this process. So you can just use Power BI Desktop, but there are a number of interesting third-party tools which you can use on top, which will make your life a lot easier. And there are some actual talks on this throughout the other day. So if you join us tomorrow, there's going to be some talks as well on Tabular Editor in using these. I'm going to cover the basis on some financial calculations. So finance calculations can be quite complex and there can be lots of variations on those. So how can we go about doing those? And then finally, just going to touch base upon a little bit about finance in the IT space. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to jump into the various advantages. So the first big advantage is you can create reports which are quick and responsive. So reports which you can click around with. Now you saw this in the last demo, but here's a bit of an example from a finance perspective. So we've got an income statement here and we're changing it between the current month, the quarter to date, and the year to date. So you can see each time I step through each of these, you're getting an update. Okay, so you can see all the numbers are updating and you've got your income statement and balance sheet. We've also got here a profit after tax bridge that's giving us all the way from our forecasted profit after tax to our actual profit in tax. And we can see where all our variances are, and we're calling out where the material variances are. And we can change this between looking at the forecast to looking at the budget, for instance. So now our bridge is based on the budget all the way through to the profit after tax, and we can see where our variances to budget are. So yeah, this is really, really something you can do in Power BI in a lot more quick and easy way. So I've got other statements in here as well. So I've got a balance sheet in here and I've got a cash flow as well. And I've got YouTube recordings and videos on how to produce all of these statements that you can get hold of. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit, which I think is really crucial, is the integration with Excel and having Excel, which is always up to date. So one of the big advantages you get with Microsoft Power BI is we also can integrate with Microsoft Excel, right? They're both Microsoft products. They work really well in tandem together. So you can have pivot tables which are completely up to date based on your latest information, but you can also create formulas in Excel which link directly to your Power BI service. So you have a formula in Excel which just shows you your latest values, but it's just linked to your Power BI data model. And this is really, really powerful. Okay, so in order to do this, what you need to do is once you've got your data model created, you need to sort of either get your data into Power BI using Excel. So here we are, get it from here, or you can go to the pivot table and you can bring it in. And there are other options as well. So for instance, you can also use it from the Power BI service directly. You can bring it in. So that's how you connect to your data. And once you've got your data connected, you've basically got a pivot table that you can then build out. So I'm just going to quickly build one out here where I'm going to be bringing in statements, and the level 1 and level 2 are the different levels of my organizational hierarchy. And Rishi's going to go into a bit more detail about how you actually build some of these out in the session following this as well. And I can see he's typing that in the chat. Great. So now that we've done that, we've been able to produce our pivot table, and we can now go ahead and let's pick a particular statement. So let's say we want to look at the income statement. And we now have just our income statement, and this data is going to stay up to date because it's going to be linked to our Power BI. This isn't a static pivot table based on static data. This is live data that's going to be pulling directly from your system. So you've always got the latest actuals updated in your Excel. Okay, but like I said, you can go a step further than this. Okay, so we've got our data here. We can also now convert all of this into formulas which we can use. All right, and to do this, we go over to the OLAP tools in Excel, convert to formulas, and we will get a warning message, but you can just skip through that. So we'll get a message down here. If we just convert anyway, and what you'll see now is all of these will now recalculate into individual Excel formulas. And it's just going to get the data. You can see that it's going across to the cloud and getting the data. Matthias, I'm going to cover the mapping and all that in a bit on the method section. Okay, so I will cover it. So now that we've converted our formulas, we now are basically using these cube value formulas in Excel, and we can drag and drop them. We can do anything that we want to. All right, so here I am just formatting it like I would anything else within Excel. So extremely powerful, extremely useful, and a way of making sure you avoid Excel hell, right? When you've got hundreds of Excels, all have got their own static data in them. Here you could have hundreds of Excels, but at least they're all linked to a single data source. So they're all going to show the same figures, which is the most up-to-date enterprise grade numbers that you need. And I can also do other things. So here I'm just adding in my actuals, I'm putting my budget, and I'm putting a variance. So the actuals are coming live from our system. The budget I'm just making up on the spot. And then the variance can just be a calculated column. So yeah, Fernando, one source of truth, hugely powerful. I think it's really, really useful, and I would highly recommend this kind of way of bringing in finance data if you want to try and, especially if you've got lots of Excels around in the organization. So there you go. That's that. So that's a huge benefit, I think, being able to integrate with Excel. So that's the second of the big advantage. The third advantage is the ability to drill all the way down into the detail. Now, with Power BI, you can handle billions of rows of data. In fact, I'm working with a client at the moment where we're doing billions and billions of rows of data, right? And what that enables you to do is it enables you to give you the headline figures for your income statement, your balance sheet, or your cash flow. And if you've got the granularity that sits behind that, you can drill all the way into that granularity. So you can start at a very, very high level. This is what my individual receipts are, my total receipts are, but then I can drill down to an individual receipt. I can see the details behind that. So, you know, who was that receipt sent to? What was the receipt value with and without VAT? What date was it done on? So the ability to deal with very large volumes of data and drill into the detail is the third big advantage, I would say. Billions of data, not with pro license, Matthias, but with a premium per user license, yes, you can. It's very possible. Okay, the third one is about security, hence the graphic there. So the third thing that you can do is you can set up security around your reports. So rather than having an income statement, you can imagine a case where you've got an income statement for the UK, for India, for Germany, for France, for Belgium. And what you can do is you can restrict that so that UK users can just see the UK. French customers can just see, you know, the France, etc., and so on and so forth, right? You get the point. But the ability to be able to restrict and just have one data set that's restricted for individual users and the people higher up the organization can see the overall holistic picture is really, really powerful. So here we have set up the user for the UK, and now we're just choosing to view it as the UK. And what you'll see now is then the numbers will change over to the UK. So I don't know why I didn't make that bigger. That was my mistake. I should have brought that to full screen. Okay, so hugely powerful. So now we've just covered through the 4 advantages. I'd like to sort of involve you a little bit actually. So if you go to menti.com and type in the code that's up on the screen, which is 80607016, what we'll do is we'll get a bit of a poll of people in the room in terms of what you see as the big advantages of Power BI and if you agree or which ones you think are the big ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a minute just to go onto menti.com, and it'd be great to get your input and to get you involved in the session. Just while I'm doing that, and just while people are filling that in, are there any questions for me so far about any of those advantages? Feel free to type them in the chat. I've got it up. Can we get contracts move position variance? Prince, are you able to elaborate a little bit more by what you mean by contracts move position variance? You can come off mute if you want.
Yeah. Okay. What I was trying to because I think each individual contract in a balance sheet within a banking scenario, each contract has some movement across in different positions due to exchange rate differences on day-to-day basis or a repayments, cash flows, lot of things. So is it a possibility in Power, because we were trying to do something similar time that, and then because of the vast calculations it didn't work out in Power BI, so we had to do in sequels rather than doing in Power BI. So I was just asking, is it a possibility for my financial statements variance, because I saw you doing it in Excel, so that's why I was just checking if it's a possibility within Excel with Power BI model behind it.
Yes, it's possible in Excel with Power BI, it's possible in Power BI, and it's also possible to pre-calculate in SQL and show the results in Power BI. So there's lots of options. Yes, is the answer, but you do have to look at the overall picture before you make a decision as which is the best solution, and consider lots of different variables. Fernando, thank you very much. Yes, I know. Okay, so, oh, sorry, we've got a question here on different currencies. So yes, there's lots of different currencies. You can use different currencies and different exchange rates. There's a really interesting set of things by Alberto and Marco, who will show you who have a thing on currencies and how to deal with it. So that's great. So in terms of the row level security, their main method is to use a use principal name, which identifies your individual username and then applies it. So it will pick up that I'm chris.barber@avanade.com. My colleague Rishi's on the call. It pick up rishi.sapra@avanade.com, and it would assign us to whichever roles we were. We're both in the UK, so we both see the UK. So that's a big thing. And yes, I will share the YouTube link. I'm just going to have a quick look at the results and see how we're getting on. So it'd be interesting to see what people have filled in and what people think of in terms of the results. So the results are just calculating through. And oh, really interesting. So it's quite split actually. I was expecting, and when I've talked to people before, a lot of it is about integration with Excel. And actually that's only the second one down. So it's really interesting that actually the ability to go all the way into the detail is really valued by this team. And it is, and if you can do it correctly and you can have large volumes of data. So thank you for those poll results. It's really interesting to get a kind of an overview of what everyone thinks. Okay. So there will be one more later on, just a pre-warning. Okay. So jumping in, how do we go about doing this? Well, I call it the 3 L's. The 3 L's are the things that you need to get, right? So when you start out on this journey, think about the 3 L's. The first one of these is the layout, right? And that is the layout of your financial statements. How do you want those financial statements to be laid out? And it's worth involving your finance team because they will have a very precise idea of how these statements can be laid out. And the likelihood as well is there will be multiple layouts for the same statements. So here we've got a statement of income statement, but you might have a balance sheet. You might have various different versions of a balance sheet, you know, some where equity is on the top, some where assets is on top. So it's definitely worth getting that actual full layout statement to start with. Okay, The second thing you need to do is you need to get hold of your ledgers. So ledgers is where you need to connect to your base system. So you connect to SAP, you connect to Dynamics, or you connect to your data warehouse. Now, obviously, connecting in and getting your live actual ledger data, that's hugely valuable. Matthias, yes, it is tough. It depends, if you've got the right buy-in at the right level of the organization, it's possible to get, but yes, there can be challenges, particularly in very, very large organizations. But, technically, it's very possible to connect into your ledgers, but understandably, companies have a lot of security around this and sometimes will restrict you. So yes, you need to involve the right people and have those discussions, but it's much better than downloading the data in Excel every day. If you have it live and you have it live from your system, then you've got live data. So yeah, it's all about connecting with the people that you need to. The third thing that you need to think about is then the link between those layouts in the ledgers, right? So you might have your gross revenue consists of your ledgers 3,000 to 3,400, right? So creating that relationship between your layout and your ledgers, and I'll show a little example of how you do that later on, is really, really key, okay? And you also need to know whether these change from year to year. So is gross revenue 3,000 to 3,400 this year, but 3,000 to 3,500 next year? So yes, you need to just have all those conversations internally. So when you're having the business conversations, these are the three things I would really suggest you think about. Okay, so those are the three. I'm now just going to talk a little bit about the method. So yeah, you could argue that the ledger mapping is the most challenging as well. Yes, you will all have different challenges depending on your own business and your own scenarios. Okay, so I want to talk about the main methods in which you can do this. So I'm going to talk about sort of native Power BI, third-party tools, and something which is relatively new, which is the paginated report visual within Power BI. So within native Power BI, I would say there are three sort of key approaches out there, which I will kind of go for. So these are the switch approach, which is one I've got a video on. There's a many-to-many approach, which Bob Duffy is, I know, is a big advocate for. He's got a video on. And there's a virtual relationships approach as well, which I've got separate videos on. So the switch approach, I'm just going to talk through a little bit about how this works, okay? So imagine you've got your layout, you've got your balance sheet, and your balance sheet looks like this, right? You've got your property, your plant, your equipment, your investments for sale. You then decide to have a blank line, and then at the bottom, you've decided to have your net current assets. Sorry, non-current assets. Sorry, I was reading the comments then. Okay, so you've got your layout. The next thing you've got in here is your link. So you've got a link between your layout and your link account, which has the link to the ledgers account. Okay, so in this example, we've got in our layout, we've got property that links to a primary key, which links to subledgers 10100, but it could link to a range of subledgers. And then that links to your fact table, which contains all of your ledger values and their values. So in this example, we can see that property equates to a value of 30. Okay. What the switch method does, though, is if you look at the non-current assets total, there is a primary key of 206. That doesn't link to any of the primary keys in the link or the subledger table, right? Instead, it's comprised of everything from 201 to 205. So basically, you have a switch calculation within DAX, which basically uses this from and to sum up everything where it's between ledgers 201, between primary keys 201 and primary keys 205. So in that case, it would return a value of 70. So that's how the switch approach, and that's the basic premise of how it works for all the accounts. And we've got a blank line there as well. So the many-to-many approach, which Bob Duffy's done a number of videos on, he's got the Power BI file on his blog, so I would urge you to check that out. There is a layout, a link, and the ledgers. Now, the big difference here is that the link contains duplicate references. So all the subledgers 10100, for example, are repeated in many instances, okay? And they're repeated for the non-current assets total. So therefore, you don't need that logic in order to sum up the non-current assets. And you can see there's a many-to-many relationship between the link and the ledgers. Now, strict data modeling methodology says you shouldn't have a many-to-many unless there's a very specific case called factless facts. But basically, this doesn't qualify. But obviously, there's an argument to be made that this is a superior approach, and you don't need to do is complicated DAX in order to get this to work. And then the third approach is very similar to the one we've just seen, except you don't have the link between the link and the ledgers, and you use virtual relationships with tree tests. So yes, you basically use tree tests. And Matthias, yes, many-to-many is evil. There is a strong argument if you really understand your data modeling, you can do it. But I would urge you, unless you are an experienced data modeler and really understand the implications, to stay away from many-to-many, or you really understand what it's doing. So yeah, make sure you know your pieces. Okay, so those are the kind of three of the kind of main approaches that are out there at the moment. Secondly, I just want to call out, I don't use them, and I haven't used them to the extent. Obviously, I've used Zebra BI visuals, but there's many other third-party tools out there. So Actress, PowerOn, there's these third-party teams out there who will provide a third-party visual which you can use to create your income statements instead. By all means, go and explore those options as well. They've each got their own pros and cons. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I wanted to call out that they are out there, and there are other sort of visuals out there which can help you. And the third option is one which I haven't really explored much at the moment because it's only recently come out. But basically, you can create in Power BI pixel perfect or paginated reports, and you can have these as an individual visual within Power BI. Now, there's a strong argument to say you could create your income statement or your balance sheet using these paginated reports and then have them as a visual within your Power BI. You would need premium in order to support this, though, so worth flagging. So those are the kind of the main methods that I'm aware of out there. But if you hear of any more, or there's any new ones coming up, and the landscape is always changing, then it's always good to input. Okay, so anybody who's ever attended any of my sessions probably knows I love this slide. So I'm going to quickly talk about a little bit of Kimball basics, just a bit of theory, and then I'm going to talk about how that applies to the world of finance. So we've mentioned on some of the other calls today about fact and dimension tables, right? The fact table is the one here in the center, and the dimension tables is around it. So our fact table contains anything we can observe or any events. So orders, prices, incidents on a road, anything like this. In our instance, we're recording our ledger and their ledger amounts. Okay, and then the dimension tables are the way that explain that. So you might explain it by date, you might explain it by country, etc. Okay, so yeah, there's options. Okay, Matthias, yes, InfoRiver is an option, and it is another third-party tool. So I'd put that in under that that banner. Okay, there's an extra sort of level of complication here to talk about in terms of fact tables, though. There are, according to the Kimball methodology, 3 main types of fact tables. And it just so happens that these tie up really well with the financial statements. So our table that's in the middle that we're trying to explain can be the transaction table, transaction fact table, which contains a list of all of the amounts in it and just basically just summarizes up through. We have a periodic snapshot, which is a point in time. This is what this amount was at this point in time. And we have an accumulating snapshot, which is a variation of the two, which is basically a point in time and then transaction as through. Now, if you think about the financial statements and how they work, the income statement, you should be using a transactional type fact table, right? It's basically additive all the way through. And then for your balance sheets, you should be using the periodic or the accumulating snapshot as a general rule. So I would generally say these are the ways you need to think about your fact tables and how they apply. So that's the kind of the link between the Kimball, the IT, and the finance side of things. So yeah, really important to think about what type of fact table you're using when you're building out your solutions. Okay, so that is everything I had to cover from a kind of a Kimball and finance side of things. What I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking to you about is, although what I've talked about before is stuff that you need to have, right? You need to have the ledgers and the link and all that kind of stuff. There are some other things which I think are hugely valuable and I would highly recommend. Now, You don't have to go down this route, and you can introduce solutions without it. But one of the big things that I find very useful is the XMLA read-write endpoints. Now, for those of you who haven't heard about XMLA read-write, it basically allows you to use the tools such as Tabular Editor, SMS, AMLM Toolkit to make changes directly in your model. And it allows you to then work with much, much larger data volumes. So, for example, when you're dealing with XMLA endpoints, and I'm going to go on to some of the advantages in a bit, Matthias, but basically you can build billions of rows of data sets, you can create new measures in seconds and deploy them. You can do loads of stuff really quickly, really efficiently. And for it, you do need a premium license. So that's either the premium per user license or the premium capacity licenses, which are just about to move over to the new versions, or will do shortly. So hopefully, Matthias, I'll give a bit of an explanation about why you should invest your time in XMLA read-write, but for me, they are essential. Lawrence, the premium licenses, if it's premium per user, everybody needs one. If it's premium capacity, then no, not everybody needs, and everybody doesn't need a license. It's just those. But I'm going to give a little bit of an explanation, hopefully, as to why I think it's so important. Okay, so here is my endpoint which I'm going to get, which I'm going to connect to. And if I go into Tabular Editor, and I'm using Tabular Editor 3, there is Tabular Editor 2, and you can do this in Tabular Editor 2 as well. I'm going to use this to connect directly to the model using Tabular Editor 3. So basically, I get my endpoint from the Power BI service, and then I can connect to it. Okay, so when I'm connected to it, I get a whole range of information about the model, right? I can see here on the right-hand side, I've got a link and a list of all of the different tables I've got within my model. So I can, for instance, now I can do individual things with each of these. Okay, so I can, for instance, refresh individual tables. I don't have to refresh my entire model. I can refresh a single table. So you can imagine if I'm developing and I'm building, I don't want to have to refresh my entire model every time I make a change. I want to make a change to one place and refresh one of those tables within it. And I can also refresh the individual partitions. So I've talked about dealing with large volumes of data, and the way you do that is you partition out your data so that each partition is, say, a month's worth of finance data, and you might have 100 of those partitions, and you can refresh them all individually, and you can have them pre-refresh, so that when your refresh happens, it only has to refresh data for the last day. It doesn't have to refresh the last 5 years. Okay, and that just enables you to work in a much more efficient manner. You can also change your M expression. So in the talk, the second talk that we had today that looked, we had in it an M expression you created using the date table, where you can actually just create and type your M expression in here or copy and paste it in, and you can update your table schema to reflect the changes between the two different M expressions. So the M expression you had at the beginning and the M expression you had at the end. So hugely powerful Tabular Editor with the XMLA endpoints, where you can read and you can write directly back to your model, and it allows for a much quicker development process. Okay, I'm just also here just showing how you can put in a new measure as well. So you can put in a new measure, and you can do this in Tabular Editor 2 as well. You can't script the DAX, but you can put in a new measure. Tabular Editor 2 is the free one. Yes, this is Tabular Editor 3. So yes. Okay, so yeah, so basically you can create new measures using this as well. There's other things that you can do with it as well. So once you've got the new measure, I can commit that back to the model and I can save it. So if I hit F5, it's going to produce that measure on the right hand side, and then I can save that down by using Control S, and that measure is now my model. Okay, so really, I'm just not trying to give you an overview of Tabular Editor 3. I'm just trying to give you a kind of a high level, but trying to show you and talk to you about the main advantages of using it. And I would say it's hugely powerful if you can get around to using it. And with the measures, you can change any of the stuff that you might have that sits behind the measure. So you can change the measure name, you can change the format string. So whether you want it in percentages or whether you want it in pounds, etc., you can add in a whole bunch of other things as well. Yes, especially we do get Tabulator 3 free, which is a blessing. I can't lie, it is an incredible piece of kit. But Tabulator 2 and the ALM toolkit and the other tools are also hugely valuable, and you can use those with the XMLA endpoints as well. So other things that you can do within the XMLA endpoints is you can read to connect to and find out where you're not following best practice. Oh, sorry, let's do macros first. So you can run C# macros, and this is in Tabulator 2, in Tabulator 3. So for instance, you can do a piece of C# here, which will add a description to every single one of my measures. So rather than going through each of my individual measures and writing out a description, I can have a C#, which I can run. When it runs, it will add the M expression into the description for my measure. So you can do scripting and all sorts of things as well, which is hugely powerful. In fact, if we look over, we've got our measure, and that measure has now been updated with the description. Oh, isn't it? Yeah. There we go. We have the description within the measure. And let's just go back over and I'll just show you what this looks like in Power BI desktop. Once it's saved. So here's Power BI desktop, and you can see in the description, you end up with the description for the measure in there. So that if I'm developing with lots of different people, then you can see how lots of people can use it. Okay, and just the final quick thing to show is the best practice analyzer. So the best practice analyzer will show the measures. So best practice analyzer is basically picking up here that I've got two measures with the same description. Sorry, yeah, I know it's not very zoomed in. Apologies on it. So basically what's happening here is the best practice analyzer is showing I've got two measures which are having the same definition. And what you can do is you can use Tabular Editor to change that over. So I don't want to go any more in depth on Tabular Editor than that at all, but that's the kind of the main benefits of using the third-party tools and the XMLA and toolkits. So apologies. Okay. All right. So now that we've gone over XMLA, the other thing I want to talk to you about is about using finance calculations in complex financial calculations. So anybody who's done any DAX at all will know that it can be quite challenging to do DAX, right? It's not simple to do DAX, especially when you're dealing with complex calculations. And this calculation for the weighted average cost of capital, for example, you'd have lots of different calculations for it, right? There might be 5 or 6 different WACC calculations you have within the organization. And my recommendation here really is to avoid doing it in DAX. So I talked a little bit earlier about how you can connect to your model in Excel. Well, what you can do is you can bring in the base data that you need and then just do your formulas as you would do in Excel. Okay, and I sort of spoke about that a bit earlier on, how you can bring it in, how you can convert this into formulas, and you can do it. So my advice, complex finance calculations, is if you don't need to do them, avoid them and bring them into Excel and follow this methodology of, converting it into formulas that are pointed at your model and do your actual calculations within your Excel. I'd be interested to know people's thoughts on that, but generally I try and avoid it where I can, doing complex DAX. Okay, the final little piece that I wanted to talk about is just a little bit around sort of personal development. And I would say that there is quite a lot of people who've got the finance skills and quite a lot of people who've got the IT skills. So a lot of people who know about IFRS and all these different things and what's the difference between US GAAP and so on and so forth, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of the IT knowledge, so know how to deal with large volumes of data, know how to actually program in M and all this kind of stuff. If you can understand a little bit of both of these worlds and have a bit of the finance and a bit of the IT, there is a huge, huge opportunity in order to build and sort of develop these models that can actually meet business users. What's it called in the middle? Yes, very good question. Okay, so I'm going to just run through a little conclusion and then I'm going to pop over to the next sort of round of quiz. But just a bit of a recap on what we've covered. I've kind of covered through the four main advantages of using the statements in Power BI, right? So you can bring the data into Excel, you can drill all the way to detail, you've got all security, and you've got the Excel integration. The 3 L's is what you really need to start out with. So if you're approaching the business for the first time, the 3 things that you must get are, you need to get the layout of your statements. So how are my financial statements laid out? You need to get a link in to your accounts and the actual values, and then you need to create that bridge between the two. So you've got a bridge between how your statements are and the actual values. I've gone over some of the key methods that I would recommend, and I've got a YouTube series on this stuff, so I will share that in the chat. Talked about Kimball, the Kimball methodology in finance, and also gone through some of the recommended tools. And then finally, we've done some of the finance calculations, and we've got finance and IT. Can you please show again the slide with the 6 important things? Yes, I can do. So let me just go back. So these are the 6 best practices things to bring in. There are just 6 that I've put on there. There are others which I would also probably use, but I would say if you get the XMLA and read right, that's the big thing. I'd hugely recommend also using deployment pipelines if you get a chance to. So deployment pipelines allow you to put up a model into a development space. They allow you to work on that while it's in development, and then they allow you to push it across into a test environment, which is connected to your test data. So your data warehouse will often have a test connection and an actual dev connection as well, and it allows you to push it through the various different stages and therefore to make sure it's worthwhile. And that is, it's not all on premium, but definitely the read write I would hugely recommend for. So these are the the 6 best practice things I would consider. Okay, so I just want to end on another little quiz, and just to get some kind of feedback. So I'm just going to move over to the next one. So if you stay on menti.com and use the same code, I'm just going to update it now to the next slide. And it'd be really interesting to sort of hear from the audience and hear from everybody here, what do you think are the biggest challenges that you face when implementing Power BI financial statements, and to get a bit of feedback on that. So yeah, really interesting to see what you think. So if people wouldn't mind filling that in. And just while people are filling that in, I'm going to take another round of questions and just have a look through and see if I missed anything in the chat. Okay. Will we get certifications? Unfortunately, I have no certifications for this. Hopefully, learning in of itself is enough value. So hopefully you'll find learning itself of suitable value. Sorry, that's my front door going. I apologise. Let me just put myself on mute a second. Sorry about this, apologies. Okay, giving everyone a few chance. I'm just going to check some more of the questions. Prince, regulatory reports become difficult. Yes, they do. Yes. Do people use the interactivity of Power BI in finance, or do they print it out? Well, you can monitor whether people are viewing your reports or not. And if you look at the release notes for Wave 2 for Power BI, there's more on sort of monitoring and checking what your users are doing. So Rishi, I know you've done a lot with clients about sort of monitoring their Power BI state and seeing who's using what and stuff like that. So that's hugely big area of Power BI. It's almost its own topic in its own right, to be honest with you. But basically, you can use Power BI audit logs or the Office 365 logs in order to collect data about how your users are using their reports and to see what's of value. And it enables you then to manage your entire estate of Power BI reports. Chris, have you ever worked with cost cascade allocation, relationships of several cascades where the receivers and senders swap places? I have not. Yeah, I would be extremely interested to know in what case you're using that, and it'd be obviously very interesting to see the business user case for that. So yes, sorry Mira, I don't know, but if you've got any more details, please put it in the chat.
Yeah, well, Mira, let's set up a call with the three of us. We'll have a look at it, and then we'll either write a blog post on it, put it into PPF. We're always looking for scenarios like this. Be really good.
Yeah, definitely, and I agree, Rishi. There's always more scenarios from a finance perspective that we haven't come across. So it's always interesting to see what they are and see the challenges. So definitely. Okay, so want to know, can we show daily financial reports as business having monthly data? Well, if your data only comes in once a month, then obviously you can't show the previous day, right? So yeah, I mean, that's a limitation of your data. Your data has to come in at a daily granularity for you to show a daily update. Yeah, Mira, yeah, we'll have to have a chat about that. So I really don't know. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and just have a quick look and see what the results that came in for the quiz. So it'd be interesting to see what people have put. Okay, taking a bit longer to reply. Here we go. Let's have a look. Okay, wow. Okay, so really interesting, the results. So, I mean, thank you for that. So the biggest challenge by a considerable distance seems to be training and understanding how to implement. So yes, it is challenging to implement financial statements in Power BI, and hopefully today's session is kind of giving you some way of knowing how to do it. What I will do is I will put a link to all the resources that I've got available. So this will include the talks that I've done on income statements, balance sheet and cash flow, and how to build out those individual statements. I'll also put a link, in fact, Rishi, I think you already did it, put a link to Bob Duffy's recording as well, because Bob did a talk on cash flows and did a separate talk as well at SQL Bits. So we'll put those in the chat. I would urge you to sort of check out those results and have a look at them. They're pretty good, I think. Getting access to the data, yes, that's a challenge. So really, that's all about stakeholder management. So you have to, I would suggest taking the 3Ls approach, saying, if you want me to implement a solution that's going to do this, I need these three things, and trying to get the stakeholder buy-in. So that's a big thing. Getting the stakeholder buy-in and getting access will get you access to the data. And then access to the recommended tools. Again, that's just a case of you have to put in the case and user case for why you need the ALM toolkit, why you need Tablet Editor, etc. And I'd be really interested to know what anybody who answered other on the challenges, what they thought the challenge were. So I'd be really interesting if you could put in the chat in regards to the other, what the other challenge was exactly. Prince, yes, I'm always in favour for keeping the DAX simpler and doing more with the data modelling if you can. There are cases where you need complicated DAX, but certainly as you deal with larger and larger models, obviously more complex DAX tends to perform less efficiently as well. So it becomes more of a challenge. So yeah. Okay. Building a forecast model off the back of actuals. So I'm going to skip over. We're definitely on the questions part now. Building a forecast model off the back of actuals plus assumptions variables. Yes, sure. Basically, that will be very complicated to do because you need to your DAX will need to be complicated or likely to be complicated in that instance because you're going to have to build in whatever your assumptions are. So it depends on how complex your assumptions are, will depend on how complicated your model is. There's an argument to say that you could, build your forecast model in something like Azure Machine Learning Studio. So you've got a forecasting model there, and then just use Power BI to display the results. So use Power BI just for the visualization thing and use a separate tool which will create and build in all of the assumptions, and then you've got the data in one place to work with. So I'd always look at, do you need to do really complicated stuff in Power BI, or is there another way of doing it to get the data in such a way that you can then build that forecast going forward. Working in a non-business context, and trying to get financial statements that make statements in BI. Yes, I haven't done any government side of things from a financial statements perspective. So yeah, it would be agreeing on what those statements need to look like. I'm sorry, I don't know much about it, and I don't have a lot of insight into the challenges you face. But I'd be happy to catch up with you on it. What about corporate consolidations? Any experience in Power BI? So SAP, one of the main ERP systems, works on having two sets of accounts within it. So it has the leading and the non-leading ledgers. So one of the challenges you have with accounting is that you can have a revenue figure for a UK company. So say you have a UK company, it rolls up to a American company. The UK company can report a revenue figure, but the US company cannot use that revenue figure in its consolidation accounts because it has to operate under different standards. So in the US, they work under US GAAP, whereas in the UK, we work under IFRS. So revenue in US GAAP is not necessarily the same as revenue under IFRS. So for instance, you might be able to recognize the goods when the customer receives them, whereas in the US, you might be able to recognize the goods when they leave your warehouse. So you need to, in that case, have two different types of fact tables for your leading and non-leading ledgers. And one of them has got to be used for your consolidated accounts and one for your local accounts. It gets very complicated, the accounts of large organizations. So yeah, you need to really understand that organization, and that is a challenge. No, sorry, no, not only SAP systems, so Dynamics or any other system. It generally, actually, you won't work directly with the ERP system. You will take the data out of the ERP. It will go into a data warehouse of some sort, say Azure, and then from Azure you will connect to and bring the data in from there. So yeah, no, it's so your ERP system. I was just using SAP or Dynamics as an example, but you could do it with any ERP system that you were using. And yes, we will have recordings. Oh, Fernando, yes, of course, export to Excel. Yes, you can do. Yeah, use the Analyze in Excel. And there's new features coming to the export to Excel as well. Okay, I think I've answered all of the questions. Oh, no, more questions coming through. Would you recommend doing consolidation in BI? Recommend doing the consolidation. Your consolidation should be done within your ERP system, because you wouldn't have, unless you're a very small organization, right? You're not going to do your consolidation in Power BI itself. You're going to do it within your ERP system. You might report on the outcome of that consolidation, but you wouldn't actually do the consolidation itself. The new features of export to Excel are, Rishi, are you able to help me out on that one? Export to Excel. I'm just looking at the release notes now.
Preserving formatting. I think it's
Yeah.
October. Yeah.
October 2021.
October.
Yeah.
Yeah, October. Yeah. So a couple of months away.
Yeah.
Do you know if if the feature was already released around, you know, the better integration between Excel and Power BI? So i.e. you could have, like you showed there, where you have a Power BI data set connected. If you have that in the Power BI service, where it will automatically refresh or be connected live rather than having to have a static manual kind of update in Excel. Do you know if that's out yet, or that was that?
Yeah.
I know it's been announced. I don't know.
So the way I've connected to it there in my model. That's how I did it. So I connected in. I think you can now do it with Excel Online as well now, Rishi.
Yeah. So the point is, if you publish that Excel file back to the Power BI service, say you put that Excel report that's connected to your data set in an app, say in the same app that your Power BI report's in, would it refresh automatically, or would it require a manual refresh still? Do you know?
I think Chris Webb's got a blog on it, but I'm not sure whether it's available yet or not. I know it's either come or it's coming very soon.
Yeah.
The integration with the online. Yes. Yeah. And just that export to Excel, just to flag for everybody, that is the public preview that's in October 2021. It'll become generally available at a later date, most likely 2022, I would expect. Right. Does anyone know if a Power BI connected to SAP? There is a Power BI connector for SAP out there. I sent at the beginning of this, I sent a link to all of the connectors.
Yeah, there was a SAP connector that was deprecated though. I think that's what they're referring to. I think it was I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the SAP connectors deprecated because of the way that they do. I think it was it was a BBC. I think it was BW actually, or something.
Okay.
So, I don't know, but yeah, there is a whole thing that Microsoft has done actually in conjunction with Click called Annuity, and that's basically getting SAP data through Azure signups and then putting Power BI on the top of that. It's not something I've tried myself, but yeah, I've watched presentations with the Microsoft and Click logos all over them with Azure. So
no, it makes a lot of sense to use Synapse to bring it through. Yes. Yeah. And Prince, yeah, I mean, Power BI is really an enterprise reporting tool now, right? Now that you can do model sizes the same as you can do in AAS, it is really an enterprise grade model that you can build now within Power BI. You know, you've got a lot of the same features, and there's that graphic that's all over LinkedIn which shows, you know, the list of features in Power BI and the list of features in AAS, and then gradually overlapping. So, yeah. Great. Okay, well, we've got a few minutes break then, and then Rishi, I think you're going to give us your session, aren't you, which is going to give us a bit more detail going through how to actually build out some of these solutions and some of the different ways in which to do it.
Yeah, so I think I'll take some really simple data, and I appreciate most people's finance data will be a lot more complex than I'm about to show, but hopefully you'll be able to apply some of the same principles just to kind of get a basic income statement in Power BI. I'll just think about some of the structures you might need to do so.
Great. So yeah, everybody, so if we just take